What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on a mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Mary Alice Arthur, and we talk about the art of hosting yourself and hosting others in normal times and times of crisis. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand, just lean back, enjoy the show, visit workshops.work and download my one-page summary. Stay tuned.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm hoping I look okay. I was just seeing a little movie of a friend who is currently the co-leader of the Green Party in New Zealand addressing Parliament, talking about we really need to look after each other. And I just was so touched, and I wrote him back, I'm so appreciating what you're doing and the person you've become. And really beautiful.
What makes the mindset of a facilitator?
It's been, for me, an interesting journey into facilitation over time. And how I got into facilitation is what I call the lateral arabesque. You know what an arabesque is? That's when the dancers, with their leg beautifully out, extended, looking like a swan kind of floating through the space. That's actually kind of difficult to do. And how I moved into facilitation, at the end of my last full-time job, which was managing a customer service training program for the New Zealand Tourism Board, I was invited to join some people I knew who were facilitators. They said to come and work with us. And I didn't know anything really much about facilitation. And then there weren't training courses for facilitation. There were people who'd learned communication skills. In fact, these two were experts at amazingly beautiful and clear communication with each other and with the group. And so I learned about how to make safety inside of groups from really being in the fire with them. That was it was like on-the-job training. It was really, really wonderful. And there's a piece of family history for me here because my granddad was a lawyer, but he became a lawyer well before the bar exam existed and schools existed for lawyers. You went and apprenticed with a lawyer and then you sat the bar exam. So I kind of feel like I apprenticed as a facilitator and sat the exam by being in the fire with people who were in my groups, learning about how to create safety, how to create containers for people to do their good work in. So facilitation comes from the French word facile, meaning to make easy. To make go easy. And classically, the facilitator's role is to help a group get to its outcome in a way that is easy for them to get to where they want to go. So interestingly enough, at one point in time in my career, I was paired with this other guy, he was a guy, to do a piece of work. And he was a person who had formerly been an engineer. He had worked on the Wellington Tunnel, not the Mount Victoria Tunnel, the one that comes in from the motorway into Wellington. And I realized at that point in time, at this moment, if you're not seeing me, I'm going to hold up a pen and I'm going to point to one end of this pen and I'm going to say, there's some people who come into facilitation because they want to get stuff done, which was definitely this guy. I am working with this group so we get stuff done. And he had a very kind of analytical, step-by-step way of going about it. And then there's some people that come at facilitation from the other end of this line, and they are there for the people. And I realized in working with this guy, because I'm towards that end a bit more, but I'm kind of the interesting blend of how do you work well with the people and get good work done? And it's actually, I find, the best facilitators are those people. How do we deal with relationships and what's going on with the group in such a way that they can move to what they need to get done, come back to who they're being, move to who they... So it's a really beautiful dance between those two things. The people who are the best facilitators do that dance incredibly well. If you go to one end or the other, I often like to say, okay, we built the tunnel. 3 people died, but who cares? We got the job done. And the other end is the tea bag is facing north. What does it mean? And we get stuck in the... We're so into the group dynamic that nothing ever gets done. So these are the two opposite ends.
Yeah.
So I think the mindset of the facilitator is about, how do I create the space where people can truly step in, respect each other, go the distance even when it gets hard, because the relational field is there enough, the purpose is clear, or at least the fire is in the center of the group and we're committed to it and we feel like we're aligned to it. And we keep an eye on what we actually want to come out of this, even if we're not totally clear what the outcome needs to be, that we actually are committed to the purpose, so we keep our eye on relationship, field, and task at the same time and keep moving forward.
I pick up the word fire a few times as you mention it. And I hear something warm about the fire. So the fire's in the middle. It's the campfire conversations, but a fire can also be a threat. And sometimes organizations are on fire and teams are on fire. So where do you find the balance between these two meanings of the fire?
I've often dealt with that sense, and this comes out of the art of hosting community too, that purpose is the invisible leader in the center. That doesn't mean you all have to agree exactly, but you need to, on some level, be aligned that there's a need. And so you've named that there are some times that the organization is on fire. There's sometimes that the team is on fire, and there's some people who want to burn the house down.
As a matter of fact.
Yes. So there, fire is like any tool. A bulldozer can clear the way, or it can smash a house down. It depends on how you choose to use that tool.
It can make space for new things to emerge, or it can create, destroy beautiful things that have been there.
Either of those. And it simply in itself is a tool, nothing more. It is the intention with which we use it. Facilitation is the same. I've often had people say to me, "You've restored my faith in facilitators," and which made me go, "Uh-oh, what happened before and who did that?" They never told me the story. They would just say something like that and look relieved. So that made me assume that either one of two things, that they had been inside of the group work they were doing forced into a fait accompli. Someone had already decided what the end result should be, and they just wanted them to get on board with it and keep going. Or number two, that they'd been forced into a methodology or way of working that really rubbed them the wrong way or brought out the worst or something. I don't know. I don't have any idea what they were talking about. But for me, it's that combination of good structure and enough warmth and connection that makes things work. So it could be that people are in distress, and what they really need first is to have an opportunity to air how they're feeling and have that really listened to. I've experienced a lot in groups that I think people talk louder or longer because actually nobody's truly listening. This culture of the soundbite and everything moving faster makes people sometimes resistant to slowing down so that everybody can be in. I don't know about you, but I've attended those meetings where, hello, welcome, we all know why we're here, let's get on with it. And I know enough about facilitation. I'm the one raising my hand. Excuse me, can we have a check-in? Can we help people arrive so they're actually ready to do the work?
Yeah.
So if you can imagine your engagement like a diamond, there are a number of parts to this in the art of hosting community. We call this the breath pattern. There is the divergence. That's where we are learning about each other. We're hearing what everybody can contribute, and we're finding out what we know together. Then there's the emergence, sometimes known as chaos. We have gone beyond the bounds of the known universe, and it's freaky because we don't know what we're doing. It appears like we're in the fog. I often talk to people and say, look, this is incredibly natural, but it feels like this. I hate you, I hate myself, and I want to run screaming from the room. That's sometimes. If you can hang in there well, then innovation comes out of that, and then comes convergence, so the action plan. But for any good facilitator, there's also what comes before. How do you make an invitation so that people show up in a way that makes it conducive and makes them able to start the process and be in it and be ready to work? And how do you do the follow-up piece so that people see that what they did was important, that it had impact, that they know with clarity what happened, and they can share that with others who were not there? Because sometimes when you have a really transformational experience in a group, people go, you've been on a workshop. I'll just wait till it wears off. So how do you take people with you? That's that question.
Yeah. And while you were speaking, I was thinking back of the meaning of the facilitator, to make things easy, facile. On the other hand, this fog that you described in the middle of the diamond, it's not supposed to be easy. And then I think it's a very thin line between making the process easy and making the struggle easy, but still adding a little bit of obstacles into the design so that they can really come out with the best selves. Because if it's too easy, in the easiest world, we avoid obstacles.
Yeah, because the human brain is set up to want to head toward the familiar. Mm-hmm. That's pleasurable to us, even if we don't like it. Mm-hmm. Oh, I really hate this situation, but it's still more familiar than the other situation. So we might hang out there for a long time simply because it is familiar, not because we like it.
Exactly. And if we have a gym trainer, we hate this trainer, right? We want to stop them immediately because we don't want to suffer any longer. But still we go back, and still at the end of the session, we love them because we are full of endorphins. But we don't pay them to make it easy. We wouldn't call them facilitators.
But they are. They're facilitating your health, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So I'm not talking about putting obstacles in somebody's way so they have to struggle with them, but I think what you're pointing to is something in nature when we see the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly. And I've seen this intimately because I got given a chrysalis one time for Christmas in New Zealand, where it is summertime. And I watched this monarch butterfly become a butterfly inside of the chrysalis and then have to fight its way out, and then hang there for a long time with its wings dripping and solidifying before it then came upright and was able to fly. So if you help a butterfly out of the chrysalis, it is never strong enough to fly. So that's what you're pointing to from a natural point of view. Yeah. But the challenge for the butterfly, comes from the concept of imaginal cells. So what happens in a caterpillar, it kind of gets the impetus to become the chrysalis. And you can see that. They're chomping away, and then suddenly there's one moment where it's like, I don't know if caterpillars look around in confusion, but you can kind of get this way. And then they make their way to some point on the branch, and then they start to form the chrysalis. Then what happens? In that moment, the imaginal cells have come into the system and they're starting to build. And first of all, the caterpillar's body tries to destroy them. And then there are enough of them that it overwhelms the caterpillar, and it goes into that natural cycle of going into the chrysalis, where it becomes, for all intents and purposes, cosmic goop. The structure has to completely disintegrate and become the element and the building block for something new, at which point it forms into a butterfly. But I would reckon that there's no caterpillar that actually knows what's going to happen. They're kind of obeying what's going on naturally in their system. And so it could be said humanity is at that point right at the moment. There is a growth of imaginal cells saying, hey, wait a minute, how we've been on the planet may have not been the best for us or it either. Are we going to allow ourselves to have almost that internal breakdown to break through to some new form? So the facilitator, the hosting role, so I think of myself less as a facilitator, more as a host. And so my intention, or what I've often noticed people are doing, they're looking at me to say, does she trust we can make it? Okay, I'm willing to do this weird stuff. I'm willing to be in this discomfort. If some one person believes we can make it, then okay, maybe I believe we can make it too. So I've often seen people looking at me, and there's sometimes when I really realize as a facilitator, I have to manage my own internal state, because if I feel confused, disrupted, disturbed, whatever, that is going to magnify itself into the group. And if I look calm, even, I remember one time I was in a meeting and somebody said to me, I saw you have this kind of look on your face. What was happening at that moment? I said, I was asking for help. Say, I don't know what's going on. Please help. I need some divine intervention. And, that was kind of interesting. He said, yeah, okay, I got that. And then he looked all right. And I've had somebody say in a group once to a team, you looked like you didn't know what was going on at that moment, but you were so transparent about it that we all decided to trust you and go on the coffee break, and it went out okay, didn't it?
Wonderful.
So there's something about excellent facilitation hosting is about having a strong practice both from the ability to be in methods and in group process and things like that, but also a strong internal practice enough that you have the ground to, as the Buddhists say, not become unseated when something happens.
Yeah.
Because if you get incredibly triggered, then you're not helpful in the group. So I look at the way that groups form and what happens. I'm a story activist, so I look at things from a story perspective. And how group work unfolds is like a good story unfolds. What's the beginning about? The beginning is about creation. Something new is going to happen. You're walking into this group, you haven't been there before. Maybe you even know the people really well, but you're not sure what this particular journey is about. That's the beginning of a good story. And then comes the middle. What's the middle about? The middle is about confusion, conflict, challenge. In fact, we humans, we don't like stories that don't have that in it because there's not enough. We don't like business as usual stories. They're boring. Yeah. It was a beautiful day. Everything was perfect. That's not the kind of story we remember. We like Lord of the Rings because there was a heck of a challenge in the middle people had to rise to. And we wanted to figure out what was the character's motivation. What are they learning? We can be in learning with them. So the middle of the story is about that. The end of the story is about completion. Okay, now we know and we're going in this direction. So part of it is about helping people stay in the storyline and also to remember the beginning has three parts too. There's the beginning of the beginning, the middle of the beginning, and the end of the beginning. There's the beginning of the middle of the middle, the end of the middle. So not all of us are in the same place in the story at the same time. People often forget that. They often say, why are they dragging the chain? Why are they? Because they're in a different part of the story.
And how do you align them then if you design a workshop as if you would design a story?
Yeah.
How do you bring the people who share the same space at the same time to be in the same moment of the story?
When we talk about this container that we're building, so I ask people to imagine a diamond shape. We call that the breath pattern. It's called the Diamond of Participation by Sam Kainer, who is one of the people who helped to name this. So the divergence, emergence, convergence. Another name for the emergence part is the groan zone. It sounds terrific in German, actually. Knirschzone is the sound that your teeth make when they are grinding against each other. Doesn't that sound? Oh, it's so cool. I take that word right around the world because it sounds like how it feels.
Knirschzone.
Knirschzone. Yes. So people really don't like being in that. But if they understand it's a natural part of how groups come together, that's fine. But you can't guarantee who's going to go into the groan zone at what time. Like you might have a much stronger ability to stay in discomfort or dissonance than me. So I've often noticed people who have very analytical mindsets, or the engineers I've worked with, or the techie people, they want to be in convergence really fast. Okay, let's get on with it. Or why do we have to have this touchy-feely stuff at the beginning? Let's just get on to the task. And usually my job is to say, boy, hang in there with us because we are really going to need you at this point in the process. So I show people where we're going to go. And there are times when I've asked people, where are you in the storyline? If we pretend that door over there is the beginning and that corner of the room over there is the end, and I've told you about the beginning, the middle, where are you on this line? Go place yourself there. Sometimes that's a stunning revelation to people. Like, oh, we're not all in the same space. Woo. That's okay. That's how humans are. They're not all going to be at the same space at the same time. So then it's the artful dance of how do I make a design that encourages people to be in, then to be open, then to get on with it. So step in, step up, step out, right? Yeah. So I might use some kind of tools or techniques like World Cafe, for example, at the beginning of working with a group so they can hear each other. So they're actually in the conversation together. People feel like their voices have been heard. And my question is always, how can I get the people's voices into the room as quickly as possible? Because when you once believe you've been heard, then you can listen. So, but if you've been talked at for the first hour, then you checked out. You become consumer, not participant or contributor. Actually, people don't just want to be participants. They want to be contributors. They want to know where their contribution is going. So how can we get people in that conversation? So often it's something like World Cafe, and you might start out like that. Then it might be some trio storytelling to really dig into what can I bring to this conversation. For the emergence part, open space is a fantastic methodology because it can be the release valve for, I can't stand you all right now. I want to talk about what I want to talk about. Okay. So, sometimes when I introduce open space, I say, so if you don't name what you're most interested in or you want to talk about, that's your fault. You have this opportunity right now to step forward and see who else is interested in what you're interested in. Mm. And that way, interesting new groups and conversations can form. People who are introverts and get overloaded with a lot of talk have the opportunity to step out for a moment and go, yeah. You have an opportunity to run over to you and say, I really want to learn about podcasting right now. There's an opportunity for people to do what they want. There is space and spaciousness. There's something really important about that. And then it's about choosing a process where we can all work on stuff and be quite aligned with where is this going from here. Mm. In the Art of Hosting community, we have a little technique called Proaction Cafe where people can directly input into different people's projects, almost like consultants showing up at your table, offering their best wisdom. And the cool thing about working in a very participatory way is you get resonant learning. Everybody learns from everybody else. Mm-hmm. My objective when I'm working with a group is to up the collective wisdom. So for me, wonderful when somebody writes a PhD. I think that's fabulous. But I think it's even more fabulous when we create collective wisdom together, because when we're learning together, when we're in the story together, we're actually increasing our collective possibility massively. And I reckon that's the thing we haven't taken advantage of. How do we do collective sense and meaning making leading to collective intelligence? And that's why stories are so fantastic.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? Do the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? Workshops.work/mastermind.
I love that you bring up the example of a PhD, obviously because I can relate to it. And I realized while sitting there for 3 years working on my topic, I actually unlearned more than I actually learned, because you become so centered and focused on one little piece that you're focused on, that you ignore a big part of what's going on outside. And actually, these other perspectives that someone with a different disciplinary background or brings in, this actually enriches what you're working on. Yeah. And I think there are often not enough opportunities to really allow a new perspective to look at your problem and your situation. Yeah. Because they will show you the blind spots that you don't see because you're so deep into your work.
I think you're naming two things here that are important. Number one is that in many parts of the world, we have moved to the expert model. Mm. It's great to have experts in things, but if that's the only model you have, then we're not adaptive or agile enough. Yeah. So the second thing to point to is, how do we learn once again to work in a collective manner, to contribute to the collective? And I thought about this a lot when I was in Denmark, because Denmark has that concept of commons. In fact, we know that in the US, the Boston Commons. It's called the Commons because the trend back at that point in time was to have a common pasture and put all of your cattle on the pasture together. Now, everybody who tends to a commons knows that the more cattle one person puts on, the less opportunity everybody has. There is a fine balance between us all to safeguard our resource so that everything is balanced. Mm-hmm. We, as a global society, are mostly in the Northern Hemisphere, fallen out of that collective taking care of stuff. You could say in indigenous culture, children are a collective thing that we look after. You're somebody's child, but every elder has the right to say, whose child are you? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to be responsible for your learning, you're becoming a good human. Yeah. So somewhere we have fallen more into the individual side and out of the collective. So it's interesting right at the point where we are recording this, and I'm thinking about living in Denmark and watching the Danes currently, how collectively they have approached the challenge they are currently facing. Mm-hmm. Because they have that in their backbone. The Danes and the Scandinavians have some of the oldest collective governance in the world, and it is formed in a circle. Mm. They met regularly in circle. The Folketinget is a really, really old form of governance. They used to meet once a year in special places to enact justice, restitution, balancing, alliances, and things like that. They met as a collective to work on all of that together. So that somehow is in their DNA. And right now, that's coming to the fore in a really interesting way. They're coming back to it. And I'm currently in the United States, and this is a very individualistic culture. It has some things to learn about being a collective together. Mm-hmm. How do we look after well-being? Not so high on the monitor here, because it's not been common practice for quite some time.
Yeah, and it's in these crises where you realize that whether the foundation works or not, because you need a very stable foundation. And we talked about that before recording, that if the culture of an organization is toxic in the first place, moving to the virtual world is even more dangerous because you didn't nurture the rituals of communication.
Yeah. So the online space brings our meeting culture into sharp relief. Mm. So where we might have had not very good meetings, they're going to get worse online because it's going to feel much more dictatorial and much more power over, simply because the medium doesn't help us get as much feeling for each other. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be that way. I've been online for years, and people often say to me, I just didn't realize we could be so close and emotionally engaged and with each other as I've experienced. That comes from a really good container, making a good process, and really good hosting.
Yeah.
So it's entirely possible to be incredibly connected and do amazing work virtually, but you have to hold the container in a different way. So just today I was looking at, I posted a video of one of our women leaders, Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, talking about we're all in this together. And I had another story colleague write to that post, yes, she is using the narrative of collective well-being, while many of our male leaders are using the narrative of war. So it's very interesting when we're talking about facilitator mindset. Yeah. What do we think we're stepping into? What story are we actually in? This is really important. It's important for groups to become very aware of it, because story is so much the human operating pattern that we don't realize we're in it. And from our stories, which influence our values, which are underneath the surface, and our behaviors are only the tip of the iceberg of everything that's underneath the surface that's in the intangible. We cannot see it, but it's acting on us all the time. What story do we think we're in?
And how can we create and tell the story? Because the words we will use to describe the story will create the reality that we live.
I love that from the Appreciative Inquiry community. Words create worlds.
Yeah.
It can also go the other way. You can find the story in a word. So it's an interesting thing if you're an organization with a value statement or a mission statement or whatever you circle around. Sometimes those things become, it feels like they're old bones, almost like they've been around for a long time. Nobody pays attention. They're not really alive. I call those the elevator things. It's like someone put a poster in the elevator and the elevator doors open and close and the thing goes up and down, but nobody's paying attention. But the way to re-enliven those is to ask people to sit around your purpose statement and to say, take one of the words out of this purpose statement and tell a story about when you've experienced it alive in our organization or between us. So doing that is a restoring of purpose. Bringing it to life again through our own lived experiences is a really quick way to shift the whole alignment in a group.
Yeah.
It enlivens something inside of us because we're so story-based as humanity. When we can awaken those kind of things, it's a dramatic shift. So, I've been saying over the past week, what story are we actually in right now? Is it a crisis or is it an opportunity? The Chinese symbol for crisis has both of those things in it. And considering where this started, it's interesting to remember that.
Yeah.
May you be born in interesting times. Is that a curse or a well-wish? I'm not sure. But if we want to really live up to hashtag, we were made for times like these, then it's important to look at both what's in us and the practices that we're using to support each other to step together into something.
Yeah.
Rather than to fall apart. Can we lean in together or will we fall apart? This is a critical question for anyone in leadership and certainly all of us who are working in the field of facilitation.
Absolutely. And it's a mindset thing. I remember when I was still working in a day job. Do you call that like this?
Yeah.
We went through a crisis with the team. And every time that we faced a challenge and we're in this situation like, oh my goodness, how are we ever going to solve that? We just reminded ourselves that this is a fantastic growth opportunity.
Yeah.
And we always went out stronger. And I think if we relabel the current crisis into a fantastic growth opportunity to see each other through the screen, to finally have real face-to-face meetings, because the previous face-to-face meetings, we didn't see each other.
No.
And now through the screen, we get a new view on what's actually behind the person. Literally, I see your living room.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful opportunity.
And there are a few opportunities in there. So we talked also before, from a physiological point of view, fear and excitement feel the same in the body. I've often asked people that, okay, your pupils are kind of dilated, you've got sweaty palms, your heart is racing. What is that feeling? And somebody will go fear, and somebody goes like, no, excitement. Another person, lust. It could be any of those things.
Yeah.
And the body actually doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
What the mind is actually, your mind is the most powerful thing. So are you going to decide to be afraid of things and therefore act out or be angry or overwhelmed? Are you going to decide to be curious about something? These are two different stances and they're both within your control. Yeah. But curiosity, fear and curiosity actually can't exist simultaneously. No, they don't fit in the same space. Yeah. So I think of somebody kind of in the corner of the room, that's fear. But curiosity makes it possible for you to go anywhere and think about anything. It's actually a really adaptable and flexible stance. And it may be challenging to do that at this point in time. But especially if you're in a small space with a number of people, being curious is going to be more helpful.
Because it's not deterministic.
No.
Fear is deterministic, and curiosity is a constant what-if state. So you tip your toes into the water, but you don't have to dive in.
Yeah. And this whole thing about, perfection is not required. I love it. A friend of mine who's an Aikido master said once that his master said to him, every moment is simply a matter of practice for the next moment.
Yeah.
And this guy also used to say to him often, you amazing. And he said, I never used to know if that meant I was really amazing or I just done something really strange. So he was kind of left in mystery, which was great, actually. Yeah. It's nice. You amazing. So can we just say to anybody who's listening, you amazing. This moment is simply practice for the next moment. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay curious and willing to find out what is yours to do in this moment of time.
And I think this is one of the greatest opportunities we have with the current situation, is that collectively we are in this moment of imperfection because we don't know. So the first time every one of us has collective permission to fail forward, to try out new things without being perfect, because we have to be fast, we have to adapt, we have to try out new things that we've never done before. And it's okay. For the first time, it's just okay. Yeah. And I think it's very nice to observe.
Two things you're pointing out there that I find it really cool. Number one, this is the first thing that all of humanity has participated in together.
We've
been impacted by things like when the volcano blew in Iceland, a lot of people had their flights stopped. The European flight corridor stopped. So that was an impact, but we weren't all in it together. We weren't directly impacted. We weren't directly participating in it. In this case, we are. And secondly, that interesting thing about we have built our societies in the Northern Hemisphere, at least, on knowing. We have to know the answer. This is a time for not knowing and staying in the not knowing long enough, not leaping to, there's the answer, let's solve this problem. Let's ask ourselves the deeply sensing end thing, who am I in the face of what this is? Who do I decide to be? And if I were able to rise to my contribution and my greatness right now, what would that look like? Mm. These are interesting questions. So I encourage everyone who's listening, don't go for the answer right now. Stay in the question for long enough. In fact, Goethe said that, stay in the question for long enough for it to become alive within you and show the way forward.
It almost feels like an ending of the conversation. And I would like to hold on a little bit longer. I always ask, and I have a good reason to prolong this conversation for just a little bit. I always ask the question to all my guests, what makes a workshop fail? And I would be curious of your answer to that.
What makes a workshop fail?
Mm-hmm.
When we're not clear on our purpose together, when we don't stop to listen to each other, when we decide that driving to the answer is more important than going together. There's that old African proverb, you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. When we mistake kind of the head nodding as I really agree with you, or when we don't make space for people to contribute or find their part in it. Mm. I think those are things that or I've sometimes have been invited to team buildings where actually there was one person who was the issue in a team and everybody's going to go into a team building because no one had the guts to raise with that person that their behavior was inappropriate or was a negative impact. Mm-hmm. Nobody had the guts to say it, so we're all going to do something instead of speaking truth. But the relationship hadn't been built in order to be truthful with each other either. So it's a time in the planet where it's a good moment to question power structures, how we've been treating each other, how we've been dealing with each other, what's the difference between power over and power with, and do we have the collective will, in fact, as a human capacity to learn how to host each other in the conversations that really matter.
Yeah, including ourselves. That's something I learned from you.
Yes. So, the art of hosting talks about the fourfold practice. It starts with hosting yourself. Mm. What is the practice that helps you stay present, that helps you stay grounded, that reminds you of who you are and why you decided to do this? And can you, in the moment when it matters, say, I need to host myself right now, instead of putting on the brave face and keep going forward, even though it means burnout or whatever it means. Second part is be hosted. So often those of us who are facilitators are never in the conversation. We're around it, we're behind it, we're in front of it, but we're not in it. So can leaders be in conversations to really find out what people think and what's going on, instead of thinking they know or listening only to the channels that they normally do? Then there's that hosting and harvesting conversations that matter. So the question is there, what conversation has my name on it? I spent a few years researching the story of Denmark going bankrupt in 13 because I felt like that story had an amazing gift to give, not only to the Danes, but the rest of the world, about how opportunity arises out of crisis. So that story definitely had my name on it. I didn't live in Denmark at the time. I didn't speak Danish. I could barely write down people's names. But I decided that that story had called me and that conversation needed to happen. And it's still unfolding, intriguingly enough, because it was a good call. And then there's the co-creation. How do you be in a community of practice and really polish your skills and get the feedback and be with peers and be with others who you can truly learn with? And then right at the center of that diagram of the fourfold practice is the mastery piece. It looks like a yin-yang. So if you can imagine, a yin-yang looks like two things, but it's actually more than one thing, because you have this, you have that, and you have the pathway in between, the pathway of practice. And we talk about those two qualities, the mastery qualities of sensei and steward. So a sensei is the master practitioner in a martial arts dojo. Their responsibility is to help the students learn the form and to integrate it so deeply that it is part of who they are. They don't have to think about it. It's simply who they're being. So that is about fierce practice. That's kind of like the masculine, the grandfather energy. But its opposite is the grandmother energy, the steward. So the steward, this word comes from the Scottish clan system, where the steward was responsible for distributing the wealth of the clan amongst those who needed it. So the steward is about, how do I open and protect a space for the new to come, for their learning to be there, for people to fail so that they can find out. This is the grandmothering energy. And together they're kind of like this beautiful bit of, I love you, get on with it. Which is what a good grandparent does, right? They embrace you totally and then they whack you across the side of the head and go, get on with it. So it's interesting to say, what is your practice? What is underneath what you do that can really hold you and those you're working with well? And it's, for me, if I'm with somebody who is just a beautiful demonstration of facilitation or hosting, I know they have inquired into the depths of their own being because they realize that they themselves are an instrument into what's happening. And all of us are called to do that in these times.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Mary Alice.
You're welcome. Lovely to speak with you.
If someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and missed the entire conversation, doesn't have time to listen to it again, what would you like them to take away?
I think those elements out of the fourfold practice. What is your practice? What keeps you awake, learning, open, adaptable, flexible, curious? Where are you in conversation so you really have the pulse of what's going on? What conversations truly have your name on them? Ask yourselves, what is mine to do? And who's your community? Because in these days, we need community to help stay buoyant. And if you think of those 4 things, where are you in your comfort zone? Wow, I really know how to do that. And where are you outside your comfort zone? Where's your learning edge? Keep working on those kind of things, because in the end, the best thing would be out of this whole thing, we came out of it all as contributors and knowing our edges and knowing where we can truly be helpful to each other and ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the 1-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.